Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Wormsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there and welcome to the WP Builds podcast. You've reached episode number 347, entitled, Who Needs a Content Management System Anyway? It was published on Thursday, the 26th of October, 2023. My name's Nathan Wrigley, and I'll be joined in a few moments by my good friend David Wormsley to have that chat. But before then, a few bits of housekeeping. You may be aware that Black Friday is coming up, and WordPress, as always, has loads of deals in the Black Friday space. We have a page. It's at the easy-to-remember URL, wpbuilds.com/black. Once more, wpbuilds.com/black. Whether you're on the lookout for deals, you can search and filter over on that page, but you also might be a person, a vendor, a person with a website that's selling a promotional product. Maybe you're into hosting or blocks or themes or something like that. Well, you can list your plugin, theme, block, whatever it may be. Find the Add a Deal button on that page and send us your deal and we'll get it onto the site. Once more, wpbuilds.com/black. Another couple of things that we're doing. I'm doing some new series. I've got a webinar series with Leo Lozovic from Gato GraphQL, which is a plugin of extraordinary capabilities. We're doing those on a Wednesday. And if you go to the WP Builds homepage and scroll down a little bit, you'll see some little sections. It's in the coming up area. It's got a black background and you'll see some little cards there. One is describing that and there's some calendar links. We're going to be on episode 2 where Leo unpacks what the Gato GraphQL plugin can do. But also next to that, you'll see that I've started a new show called Speed It Up with Sabrina Zidane, and she's going to be taking a look at your WordPress websites and trying to figure out what can be done to make them a little bit quicker. Over on this URL, wpbuilds.com/speed, you'll be able to submit your site so that Sabrina can cast her expert eye over those websites and figure out ways to make them a little bit quicker. As we all know, this is a really good idea. The only other thing to mention that if you fancy making a comment about anything that you hear on our podcast, we'd really appreciate it. If you go to the page, search for the title, search for the number of the episode, and leave us a comment there. It really is appreciated when you leave the comments on the actual website. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with the Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place. Invoice clients and get 30% off new purchases. You can find out more by heading to go.me/WP Builds. That's go.me/WP Builds. And we thank GoDaddy Pro for their continuing ongoing support of the WP Builds podcast. Okay, so what have we got for you today? Well, it's David Wormsley and I having a chat about content management systems. Do we need them anyway? Are they the best way to put a website together? Are they a bit overkill? Is WordPress even the best one? Have you got a history of creating complicated websites only to find that your clients never touch it and could have had a static site all the time? Well, we explore all of this in the podcast today, and I hope that you enjoy it.
Hello, it's the 18th episode in our Thinking the Unthinkable series, and our topic today is who needs a content management system or CMS anyway? And recently I've asked myself this question and it's turned my entire web design business model upside down, which we'll get into as we go along here. But Nathan, perhaps we should just talk about what WordPress is. Post-Gutenberg, is WordPress a CMS or is it a page builder now?
Well, I mean, I think it's always been a CMS since custom fields came along. I think prior to that, it was basically, as we always say, it was a blogging platform. So it was that. And then custom fields came in and, all the permissions that all that has. And whilst it was very much a coding environment, you had to know the templating system and make that all work. I think at that point, it became a traditional CMS, a content management system, able to wrangle things and put different things in different pages. And now more recently, off the back of the success of page builders, think of things like Beaver Builder, Divi, Elementor, and a whole host of others, they've introduced Gutenberg. So I think it's basically trying to be both at the same time, which, who knows how that's going to work out in the long term. So yeah, I think it's both, really.
Yeah. Did you have a sense you would have been working with Drupal, I guess, back when WordPress kind of became a proper CMS, if you like, version 3, I think kind of did that because that's when the custom taxonomies came in and it had that front page thing where instead of, by default showing, or it was the only option, I think, initially without doing some, adding a plugin or something. Yeah. You had the post showing, because it was a blogging platform. Did you have a sense of that going on or changes?
No, I literally had no experience of WordPress until I started using it more or less exclusively. I was using... honestly, the journey here is... we share show notes, and I've written down a few, and there's probably a whole load more, but a few came to mind. So there was Drupal, there was Joomla, I used Expression Engine, which was actually, if memory serves, you had to pay for that. It was a commercial license. I tried out Concrete 5, which had a really interesting UI in that you would actually edit elements within the page. So it was almost page buildery. I did Moodle and everything else. Oh, wow. And really, it came off the back of me trying to build a CMS of my own and realizing that ultimately my heart wasn't in learning PHP to the ninja level that I think was required.
Yeah.
I was continually frustrated. I had a family, so my attention was diverted. I couldn't concentrate and really dedicate time to learning, and I was juggling projects at the same time. I've got to say, though, when I came to WordPress from Drupal, because of all the ones that I've just mentioned, Drupal was the one that stuck, and I used that over and over and over again. I found WordPress to be feature poor, and really, the only reason that I started exploring it was because everybody kept banging on about it. I used to subscribe to a physical magazine which dropped through my door every month. It was called .NET. I've no idea. Do you know, is that still going?
I don't know.
Yeah, it was a physical magazine, though, which is kind of weird that you get a magazine about the internet written on paper. It dropped through my door, and every month there would be something. Increasingly, there would be more and more and more articles about WordPress. So somewhere in the background, the team that created that magazine had decided basically that WordPress was the thing. And they kept talking about how easy it was and all of this kind of stuff. And I logged into the WordPress for the first time, and the first thing that hit me was, okay, it's beautiful. That's one thing. It was really nice to look at. And largely, it hasn't actually changed in the last 10 years, I think. More or less what it looks like now on the admin side is what I was looking at the day I logged in. Maybe it's time for a bit of a change there. But I found it to be feature poor because things like custom post types, there was no UI for that. You had to download a plugin or do it yourself. You had to know the code. And so my journey got to WordPress. And at that point, I thought, okay, I'm going to stick with it because of a whole bunch of reasons that I didn't want to go back to Drupal, because you just had to rebuild everything every few years because they don't honor backwards compatibility. So I stuck with it and then found a bunch of plugins which replicated the functionality that Drupal had got. So I used things like ACF and Toolset to kind of do the custom fields and the custom permissions, different roles and what have you. And then that was it. I haven't looked back. I really haven't gone anywhere else to see what the current state of play is, which contrasts so heavily with your journey because you're always really curious. I'm much more of a kind of stick in the trenches. I'm using this now. Whereas your journey at the moment, at least anyway, you've really taken a long, hard look as to whether or not WordPress is a useful tool or a bit of an impediment.
Yeah, and things have changed, but it's interesting because I haven't really connected all the dots with your start until you just talked about it now. And mine is slightly different because I guess I couldn't understand things like Drupal because I couldn't get my head around what taxonomies were and custom fields. I wasn't kind of at that level of manipulating bits of content. So why WordPress came in, because it was the first inclination I could get into sort of dynamic web. Firstly, with just a bit of a blog, just to experiment. It was easy because there wasn't too many. On that one, which was
David, I lost you there.
Oh shit!
I lost you for about 5 seconds. So you had just said. Let me just write this down. Hold on. You had just talked about the taxonomies. You didn't understand the taxonomies that Drupal bought. So you could take it from there if you like. Let me just clap and then I'll know what's going on. Hold on. Right.
Yeah. I think my net's playing up. Hello.
Okay. What do you think? Is it?
I don't know.
Well, we can keep going.
If I refresh, will it cause a problem?
No, it should be fine. I think this system is persistent. So yeah, go for it.
Okay, I'll do that then.
Yep.
Same thing going on.
Back in the room. He's back in the room.
And you're clearer, but I do have this sign saying my internet connection appears distant or delayed.
Oh, what? In Clean Feed?
Mm.
Oh, interesting. I don't get any kind of metric about that. You'd have thought, given that I'm the person running the call, you'd have thought it would have been good to show me that, but they don't.
No, just me. Yeah. Anyway, you're clearer now. Sorry. Right.
Okay.
So I'll carry on from. So I just said.
I just talked about Drupal and blah, 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 and you just said you never used it because you couldn't get your head around all the taxonomies and stuff, so we can take it from there.
Okay.
Or can we?
I forgot what I was saying after that. Oh, yes. Right. Okay. Yeah. So what's quite interesting, and I haven't really connected the dots with you in your journey for Drupal and how different it was for me, because I just started with it just because I wanted to get into the dynamic web, and it was a simple way in because it didn't have all of these extra things. And that's what got me in. And then I realized, you could probably do e-commerce. And, talking about how we got into this, I really, what kept me with WordPress was the fact that e-commerce for a business for my wife. And then also what I actually needed was a way of being able to communicate with staff online. And I was able to quickly turn this into a sort of private blogging, which worked as a sort of private intranet for my work. And that got me in all that dynamic stuff. But it's interesting going back to that first thing, whether it's a page builder, because although that's, been muted now, there was a point where I thought the custom fields were going to was going to disappear from WordPress and go into blocks only. I thought that was going to be deprecated. So that would have switched it. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely would have stopped being the featureful CMS that I think it is now. Yeah. It's interesting. When you were saying that, there was a certain point, and I don't know where it was, but it must have been the moment I started using Drupal properly, because it's the one I settled on, where I think I must have been selling websites to clients with all these features. So, for example, in Drupal, you would build the blog. The blog wasn't a thing. It was just you had to create a custom post type called blog. And then you would create an RSS feed for that blog. That wasn't automatic. That was another thing that WordPress did. To do an RSS feed, you had to actually create that yourself. And there was a simple-ish way of doing it. But I started to sell the features like, okay, you've got staff. Let's create a staff custom post type. Let's create a locations custom post type for each of your offices. And then we'll start to connect the data and create relationships. So we know that these staff members work at these offices, but we also know that they're in these sub-departments. And so I started selling that. And it was really, really easy to do because the people that I was selling it to loved it. That there would be, okay, you enter the details of your people here, and you enter the details of your offices here. And once you click publish, it will automatically put it in the right place. And you could tell there was this like, aha, moment. And it really, really sold itself. And I think at that point, there weren't many people offering those kind of solutions because, these CMSs were still quite new. So it kind of sold itself. Whether or not it had any utility or did them any good, I don't really know. But it was shiny, and they bought it.
Yeah. I mean, WordPress effectively taught me, because it was turning into a content management system, it taught me what a content management system needs to do, or what it is, So it's kind of a learning thing. And I guess it was just that easy way in for me, before I was ready to understand these concepts. And, I was going from straight pages really with HTML and CSS and got into that. But so, yeah, it's a slightly different route because you already, before you came to WordPress, you knew what you needed and you were looking through that, where I really hadn't gone that route.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. So I bought quite a few Drupal books, and I even subscribed. There was a really great online course that you could buy. That the product was called Build a Module. And I forget the name of the guy who ran it, but it was this guy, I think he might have been Canadian, but he was really laid back and he was a really nice person. And he'd created like courses to do everything in Drupal. And you paid this one annual fee of like $100 or something like that. And you got to see all of his course content, and he went through it all. And he explained it so well. Like, here's the point of a CMS. This is what you can do with it. You can create different custom fields, custom post types, link it up, display it on the front end how you like. And so that helping hand was brilliant. I honestly don't know how far I would have gone with Drupal were it not for that individual, because I probably spent a week just consuming the content and creating the dummy sites that he mentioned. But it really drilled into my head, okay, if you're going to use a content management system, okay, you've got all the logins and permissions and all that, but here's the point of it. It's consuming bespoke data and then putting it out on the other side. And I was able to build with that fairly complicated things, like there was this one website that I did for a local fitness firm, and we had, like, whenever somebody signed up, they had to pay to sign up, and then they'd become part of his platform, and then he could input data, they could input data, and it would show on this front end for them what they'd done that week and how their fitness was going. It was getting to be much more complicated probably than I could achieve in WordPress still to this day. So it kind of sold itself. And as soon as it lodged with me what the point was, I just started telling that to my clients and all the other clients. And like I say, whether or not they needed it, I don't know. And I think you've come full circle, really. You've realized that most of your clients now, they're not really beguiled by that. They're more persuaded by the arguments of less is more. We don't need all that. You just need pages.
Yeah, it's gone full circle for me because it's with a different outlook on it. So, it starts with me wanting to get into the dynamic web, and PHP is the only thing that will allow that. And I start because I'm curious, because the word is getting out about WordPress. So I check it out, do a blog, then I see all these other things that I can do. As I say, the internet and the e-commerce, and that gets me in. But I didn't intend to do the client work, so I didn't have that expectation until somebody came with a WordPress site that needed rebuilding. And I had the skills then to be able to rebuild that, which led on to me working with somebody else who essentially became my client. So they needed the CMS because they were previously working with HTML and CSS and couldn't update the content for their existing clients who needed a rebuild. So I worked with her to do that. And the CMS, in most cases, was for her rather than the client at the end, because she was doing they just, rang her and said, can you change this on the site? And she wanted an easy way of doing it. So if it was something like a new page, the idea of having to go cross your navigation on every single page and change this one link,
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the big problem with working directly with just HTML and CSS and no system. So she was into that, and that was it. But it's only now that I've come to say, well, how many of my existing clients, as they're not taking it to my colleague, actually need it? And could they just take it to me, who will just do it with CSS,
So I remember in the day with PHP include files, building So this was before CMSs, trying to come up with ways so that I didn't have to. So the menu is the perfect example, the main navigation. You have a PHP include file, which is put into a template, and the menu lives in there so that every time a page is rendered, it calls the PHP file, which is the menu. So you would only have to amend that in one place, and it would then appear on the whole site and so on. How are you getting over that problem if you're intending to not use WordPress and you're not using some sort of server-side technology? Or are you going to be using WordPress to do things like that, but building the sort of templates, if you like, by yourself?
Yeah. Well, there's so much to unpick here. So, I mean, in some ways, I wanted to decrease my dependency, my client's dependency on WordPress and extra plugins, but it still is essential for me as a static site generator to be able to organize my code. So I've turned WordPress gone back to its basic, simple roots using shortcodes and custom fields to be able to take snippets of HTML and CSS, which I'm doing by hand, and put it where I want. So even though I'm not using the menu system as such in WordPress to build these static sites, I have got a little section where I keep all my menu stuff. So when I put that there, it gets sent, it's one link where I change. It's the same. I'm just doing it manually. So
it's in a sense, it's a PHP include file. You've got this
exactly
block of HTML in a presumably navigation file, and you go in, and if you need to create another menu item, you add another LI or whatever it may be, and save it, and then it gets propagated across wherever that is needed.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's it. I've got shortcode going into where my header is on my theme. And, in that, I've got the HTML. I just go and change that, and it's going to go to all, my WordPress, where my WordPress header is across all of those pages.
Right.
And, so, and actually, I mean, I only found this out recently that I was looking at static site generators as an alternative because WordPress seemed unnecessary. But actually, that I'd see an issue with all of those, because in what I think is the future, which is component-based design, where you create kind of sections of your code and put it to where you want on your pages or your site. With that, if you go through any of those static site generators, and there's tons of them out there, Astro was the one that I particularly like. There's Jackal, there's Levity, Hugo, all of these. But I think all of them, if you do this component, so if I want a little menu component that I'm going to change in one place for all of the site, I think all of them stick in their own arbitrary HTML into it. They stick in their own selectors, which I don't want, where what I'm doing with WordPress, slimmed down, doesn't do that. It just gets the clean code out there. So
is that the reason you're not using WordPress's menu infrastructure? Because it's injecting things that you don't necessarily need. You've decided to opt for your own file dragged in by a shortcode because you just want that HTML to be the leanest, meanest possible.
Exactly that.
Right.
Yeah. And it's just flexible.
What is WordPress by default? Let's say you do a vanilla install of WordPress, and rather than use your own shortcode for the menu, what nonsense, in your estimation, is WordPress bringing in to, let's say, the menu? What nonsense is it surrounding itself by?
That's a very good question, and I don't think I've thought about it. It does add in a bunch of selectors if you use it, that I don't necessarily want.
Got it.
And don't need. I'm sure there's more that I would have to wrestle with. It was quite a decision to do that when I was sort of slimming things down, because I thought, well, the menu makes it so much easier. But of course, it has to know when it's there's lots of ways I do menus differently now. In fact, for a mega menu, I'm using HTML dialog, which is just only recently supported. If I was doing a mega menu via WordPress, it's quite a lot to wrestle with.
So it's, in your sense, it's an enterprise to just strip it down to the leanest it can possibly be, and superfluous, classes of CSS that get rendered because it's the first or the last or whatever it may be. Is that's the point. You just want to be in total control of that. Got it.
Yeah, and WordPress is great for moving that kind of stuff around. Just because of that, custom fields and shortcodes just gives you everything that you need, really to be able to do stuff and being a familiar thing. So it makes a very good static site generator with, one less issue that you might have if you were using one of those, known ones. So WordPress is still very much at the center of everything I do every day still, but it is quite interesting how I've moved away from the Gutenberg change. And I think that is I still see it in debates. I occasionally look in on certain groups on WordPress, and I saw there was a wonderful, in one of the groups, conversation going on. And it must be close to sort of 500 comments or something it got on the spacer GIF in Gutenberg. And it really highlighted the how everybody saw what WordPress was. For the person who started the debate, it was the fact that, well, there's no room for this you don't need spacers if you know what you're doing. If you're a professional, there's no reason that shouldn't be in there. It's not suiting professionals. And there's a whole bunch of other people.
I can see where this conversation went. Yeah.
Yeah, a whole bunch of other people going, well, are you just not getting WordPress? I mean, it is publishing for everybody. It's got to be so your mum and dad can understand it, and they won't understand paddings and margins. So if they need that, they need it. If you don't use it. And I just thought, yeah, it really gets to the fundamentals of, when I came in, it always felt like it was a developer platform. Which it wasn't really, was it? It was always a platform, allowing people to publish was one of its key, I think, principles from the beginning as a blogging platform.
Yeah.
So my misunderstanding of it, I've seen it was a simple unit, if you like, to develop on top of, and developers did that, to present day where people say, well, now, and I think it is more of a page builder or seen as that, where they think, well, of course you need a spacer GIF, don't you? Because mum and dad aren't going to know how margins and paddings and which one you should use under which circumstance. They just need to stick a space in if they're going to create their own page.
Yeah, it's interesting. You can imagine that the people that created that block, the spacer block, they must have known, actually, this is utterly superfluous if you know what you're doing, if you understand that, well, this could be padding, margin, whatever, bottom on some other thing. But the fact that it's there does help people who haven't the faintest idea how to do that. So it's utilitarian, completely brilliant for those people that don't know otherwise, completely annoying for those people who do know otherwise, because it's just added a load of markup that's not needed. But who's the intended audience? And I guess if you know that you don't need it, don't use it. That would, I guess, be the thing. But yeah, the complaint would be, well, it shouldn't be in core. It's just bloat in core. But yeah, it's hard, that one.
I think when Gutenberg came out, it was billed initially as a new editor for, I guess people can consider it as a new editor for the CMS. But I think in reality, most people quickly adopted the idea that it was the start of a page builder era. And I think, right back to, I think even 2014, I think Matt was seeing Wix as a competitor for WordPress. And obviously, when you look at the millions of people that have brought, page builders that have brought people to WordPress. So, Elementor's 13 million, there's Visual Composer with over 5 million, Divi over 4 million, Beaver Builder over 1 million. I mean, it got to be about 24 million people before we even get onto things like Gutenberg add-ons. So I think clearly the perception of WordPress now has to be predominantly as a platform for page building.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're in a bit of a bubble, aren't we? We go to these WordPress events, we're in these WordPress groups, and it's just dominated by people who probably use it on a very frequent basis. They are, they might be expert coders, they might be plugin developers, but they're keen on WordPress in some way. Whereas I imagine the vast majority of people who are using WordPress have not the faintest interest in any of that. They just want to log in, type some content, chuck in an image, and press go. Publish. They've got no interest in all of the wider concerns. And if it's not perfect, who cares? It's my website. If I wanted it to be perfect, I'd hire an expert. And that's a difficult seesaw to balance, isn't it? At what point do you say, well, screw the developers or screw the end users? I honestly, that's such a difficult tightrope to walk across, I think, knowing what to put in, what shouldn't be put in. And so it's all very well getting on your high horse about things, but I guess you do have to think at least about let's even put some numbers on it. Let's guess it's like 70% of the WordPress user base haven't the faintest idea that HTML's even a thing, or certainly not CSS or JavaScript or any of that. It's just a SaaS app as far as they're concerned. They log in, do their stuff, and what have you. So all of that needs to be borne in mind.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly my, my view of the CMS. I mean, why I need, what you said, obviously going back to Drupal days, did you were showing clients, how they could, put your team stuff in here and your page stuff here and et cetera. Is that because that was led by the client, do you think?
No.
Or is it led? It's interesting.
No.
Yeah.
The way that I mentioned it was, so I would build a mock-up, and then I'd, for example, show that if you put in a client member here and you save it, you only have to do that once. And then it'll appear. Oh, and then if you've got the taxonomy as they're working in the conveyancing department, then if you go to the conveyancing page, look, they appear over there. Did you have to do that? No. You just had to click a button to say they're a conveyancer. And it sold itself because they considered that to be, a more fully featured website for no extra effort. Now, they truly probably didn't need it because they could have just had a team page with all of their team members on, and each person has a little, a little subheading underneath their name which says conveyancing. That's really all they needed. But it was beguiling. It was the beginning of the internet. The more things it could do, the better. And everybody was falling over themselves to have more complicated websites, it felt like. Now, I probably wouldn't do any of that. I'd probably just go, look, just have a About Us page for your whole team, put them on there. Nobody's really interested that person is a conveyancer. Not really. We just need to know that they exist. And so, yeah, I sold it probably quite unnecessarily because I was technically into it.
Yeah. I think, the big division for me, I guess, with the CMS and the page builder is the fact that the CMS, when you started with it, essentially all you were providing to the client was the ability to change what essentially was their HTML content, their text that went in there, and be able to add in an image or something like that. And maybe it needed to show up in different places. I think what switched with the page builder mentality is that no longer is somebody going in to just do that. It's that plus styling and layout. And for me, that was a wonderful thing, actually, when my first client needed to do some of that, which is essentially the person who was dealing with her clients. But then after a while, what was a wonderful thing when I jumped onto the page builders and thought this was just fabulous that you could do this, I've realized that I've swapped one problem with another, really. I've just now I've got a bunch of people who think, yeah, they can do my job.
Yeah.
They could just style it themselves, know? So, yeah, and I think that is the distinguishing thing, whether people want to, because in what you're describing as a content management is something that I still need today. I still need to be able to update in one place. And because it's, put in a field somewhere and going to output in various different locations, I still need that today. And I don't think that's ever going to go away. But what has changed is what the client needs for me.
Right. What if a client comes to you now and has distinctive requirements that you think, okay, that's CMS territory? In other words, I don't know, maybe they want to be able to display it, or maybe there's some sort of conditional logic that displays things in certain scenarios. Do you just is your modus operandi going to be, I am not the person for you?
Yeah, that's that.
Right.
I've decided that. I mean, there's no reason why I couldn't do with what I'm doing now. The simplified WordPress still give them that option to And in fact, it's still a possibility because even though I say I've stripped it out, WordPress is still working as a content management system when it comes to simple HTML with the old editor outputting blogs. I'm not going to put that in my own separate HTML folder when there's WordPress can perfectly do that kind of content management itself. I could make that available to clients, but I've decided not to, just to see, well, basically I've asked them what they want. And given that a lot of them have had a WordPress site, it's been quite interesting to find out that it's, they think they want that and they want to carry on. So they want you to build a new one so they can go and input that stuff. But when actually we get down to it, they've seen downsides of having to manage that themselves because they have stuff up, or other people have stuff up their site with it. That if there's the option, which I never offered before, it's like, well, you just send your updates to me, and actually this is all going to be basic code, so you're not dependent on me. I'm not using any frameworks or any specialism, so if I get run over, you can use somebody else. And most of them have said, oh yeah, we'll do that.
So in the same way that, if I look back on it, I was upselling CMSs in a way that probably people didn't need. Are you doing the opposite? Are you downselling CMSs? Are you basically trying to convince people that they don't need all this stuff? And is that working? Are you typically, if somebody comes to you and they are CMS ready, do you successfully turn them into, you don't need a CMS?
Well, that's what's been happening. I mean, we've only got a few clients really to judge this by. So, I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of work I now won't do because, but there is an easy upsell for them, and that's the cost of hosting with this. If they have to have a CMS running on a server, they have to have a server, so they can't get the low cost of serverless hosting. So, without going through a really complex route of headless with WordPress. So that's a big selling point. But I think, largely because of the change anyway to this more agile ongoing approach anyway, it sort of makes sense. It's like, I'm just going to be their person to help them with what they can do with their websites ongoing, as they want to change. And for some, they like that. Somebody said to me recently about that, I quite like this new setup that we've got because I'm always wanting to experiment with things we can do on the site. And then I have to get somebody else in to rebuild that thing. And then I have to manage what they've rebuilt for me. But I might change my mind on it with this ongoing thing. It suits how they keep changing their mind on their business.
Yeah.
And I've come to the conclusion that, I wanted a CMS to allow me to get into Dynamic for my purposes. And then it became something which became a client requirement because I thought they wanted to manage their own stuff, which, there's good reasons for that still, do you think? I think, why would the client need a content management system now if they're not page building?
Yeah, I totally get the point. I mean, obviously there's going to be clients that completely do need a content management system because they have data, and that data needs to be combined with other data, and it's constantly changing. So it needs to be pulling stuff out of a database. I totally get it. But also, I think the majority of the people that I worked for just simply didn't need it. It was just, like I said, a conceit of mine. Really, they just wanted 6 pages and a contact form that worked in some way, shape or form. They were just offering a local service, and that's all that they really wanted. I don't know. I guess I'm kind of more wedded to WordPress than you are for obvious reasons. I do a bunch of content in the WordPress space. I kind of have a more favorable opinion of it as a requirement for me. If I'm building a website now, the default is going to be WordPress. I'm not really giving it much thought beyond that. It's just I'm familiar with it. There's muscle memory there. I'm happy to use it. I'd still be happy to recommend it. But I can see why in your newfound love of the HTML spec and the new exciting things that are happening with CSS and all of the opportunities that brings, I can see why you're kind of falling out of love with all of the bits and pieces that you were once in love with.
Yeah, well, I still kind of need it on a daily basis. I think there was, for some, and I think it was sold this way, I upsell, my colleague did at the time, because of the things that a lot of people look to a CMS for, is because it might, if they can put in their own HTML content, let's keep it to that with the CMS, they can reduce their, what are often high development costs, aren't they? If they have to go to their developer all the time and check that they're still in business just to change an address or something.
Well, that was always one of the big sellers, actually. That was definitely one of the things that I mentioned. And in fact, explicitly mentioned it in my advertising for work was, you don't need me if you don't need me. Do you remember that time when, like, literally the most meager of changes meant that you had to do it. You had to log in, and it could have taken you 20 minutes to do something as simple as change a telephone number, because you had to find the right template for the header and all of that kind of stuff. And but now with the CMS, I made the point that really, if you just need to do modest changes, I'll show you how to do that, and you're off to the races. And they love that because they get some ownership. They get to feel that they're part of the journey. They get to feel that they're creating and inputting things. And so I still think, honestly, if I was pitching websites, I still think that would be something that I'd be mentioning.
I think, if you can stick, well, as it stands, if you're just using WordPress itself, because that's an independent, reducing the cost is not that. The idea that you can give somebody their site and it's theirs and they have some independence of you as a developer is a real selling point. And I think if you are largely sticking to WordPress as it is, probably the maintenance cost of that isn't much. So it still has a good selling point. But once you get into additional third-party plugins and page builders, there's quite a lot to maintain with all the updates that come with that and changes that they might make commercially for a client to deal with. So there's a sort of presently, and the setup that I gave most people depended on quite a number of commercial products, which all changed all the time. There was only the illusion of independence.
Yes. Yeah, that is a really good point. There is this sort of bloated nature. If you can't figure out how to do it yourself, just get a plugin which does it for you without any thought for the consequences in terms of how that affects page load time. But we're in a new era, aren't we, where if you want to win the SEO race, things like that now matter. So the bloat that you're adding with a CMS suddenly starts to be important. However, having said all that, the WordPress performance team do seem to be doing great work. They've just recently announced that, well, we're recording this in July 2023. They're announcing that they've shaved off about I think it was either 17 or 19% of a core block theme. So they're working on that. So I don't know, maybe as time goes on, those reasons will dissipate a little bit.
Is that back-end stuff or front-end?
Front-end. Yeah.
Interesting.
So that was, I guess that was a default block-based theme. I think it was more like 11% off a classic theme, but I don't know which theme they were using. I'm presuming they were using the, the default theme 2023. And yeah, this latest release of WordPress is going to shave about 19% off and I can't give you the exact metric of what that 19% measures, but it's all going in the right direction anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is, part of me is making out that WordPress has turned into a page builder post-Gutenberg, but there is also part of that project where I'm going to contradict this, because also built into it in the next stages, the collaboration stage and the multilingual stage. You could say that they are very much the foundations of using a CMS, and there will be those websites, obviously multi-author websites with lots and lots of content being posted regularly where, multiple people need to work on. I can't serve those people at all. WordPress Live might be able to do that very well in the future.
It'd be interesting to see how your journey goes, because I know that your business, just in the time that we've been doing this podcast, your business has gone through quite a few iterations, and you change as you need to. Be interesting to see in a few years' time where that's got you. Whether it's given you the freedom and the correct, in inverted commas, I'm doing air quotes, the correct way of doing a website, or whether you'll realize, actually, do you know what? That was a lot more work. I've got to end up on the phone quite a bit more to actually change the client websites, which it turned out they needed changing more. So back to the CMS. Let's see.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I just think actually it's what WordPress allowed me to do has become one of its problems as well, because it allows you to effectively be everything to every client in a way through its plugins. And it's been a slimming down of, okay, I'm just going to learn the one skill, which will be the HTML and the CSS stuff. That will be my fundamental skill. And it's quite a good time at the moment because there is so much with CSS that means that you don't need to do so many hacks and you don't need to rely on so many plugins to be able to achieve the same thing. So
yeah, it's going to be interesting. The stuff that's coming around down the pike with CSS really is going to make you question whether you need a page builder, I think, because you're going to be able to do these complicated layouts fairly straightforwardly. I mean, clearly, you're not going to get that. What you see is what you get. Although, you wait, somebody will come along with some clever tool that allow you to build on the web and then just export the HTML and chuck it where you need it. I bet that's coming. And those complicated layouts will be possible with the CSS that you're now learning.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when we had that chat before, we're going back on an old chat now, but when we was talking about interoperability and browsers and will that change page builders, is a threat to it, I was grasping to see a future of how you might build pages. And actually what I wasn't aware of, people were obviously ahead of me on this one, and the dynamic component-based nature of the web. And that's because of pretty much everything that's been changed now, isn't it? The kind of clumsy way that we would build our pages and use media queries based on the width and set them to various devices. Now, pretty much everything is coming into place where you can design these elements. If you've got a form element, you can set it up with container queries so it reacts dependent. It doesn't matter where it is.
Right.
And add layer and stuff like that so you can separate it from anything else on the page and basically dump these components within pages. And I think what's been very interesting is I still think it will threaten the existing page builders because there's a new concept about how you might just generally go about building pages.
Yeah, the page builders might just become a conduit for dumping the CSS spec onto a page as opposed to some proprietary way to do it with the bespoke HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It's just, okay, if you want a form that is conditional, here's how you do it.
Yeah, dynamic. It's dynamic. You can now build sort of HTML and CSS dynamic things which will slot into any grid-based page effectively.
Yeah.
And I think, that's going to fundamentally change about the approach about how we will build up our library of units that we will use on pages, and which still is not quite possible yet because all the CSS spec isn't there in place, but it's just there and committed to. So it's coming shortly. So I think there will be some massive changes. So it's, so even if you're still very much committed to WordPress and, what you're using, I think, it's a fascinating time to get into what's going on with CSS and how greatly that's been changing over the last couple of years.
Well, we will drag you back in 4 years from now to see how that's going. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? The promise is always easier. The promise of everything, whether it's the CMS, the internet, any platform, it's always going to get easier. My experience is it usually gets more complicated. So we'll have to see how that all goes. Are we done?
We are done. Yeah. There was only one thing I would just wanted to say on that one is just the fact that it's basically the language of the web we're talking about here, not a product which is based on the language of the web.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth watching it,
getting back to the
CSS
roots.
Yeah, CSS working groups and what they're doing and why they're doing it is really interesting.
Lovely. Okay, well, we'll be back in a couple of weeks, and who knows what the subject will be. We've got some listed at the bottom, but we're not quite sure. Oh, no, we are. Exactly. We've decided, haven't we, that we've put those in the right order?
We have, but the next one's such a challenge to do, I think. We'll do this one. Yeah, we'll do it. Next one
is 20 years too long in tech? I think we know what we're talking about. So, yeah.
That's 140 years in web.
Is that right? It's like dog or cat age. Okay, 140. Yeah, that's excellent. Okay, well, that'll be with us in 2 weeks' time. Lovely chat. I'll speak to you soon. Yeah,
thank you. Bye.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. Always a pleasure chatting to David Wormsley about these things. What are your thoughts? Do we need CMSs? Has WordPress become too complicated? Are there better options out there? Should we just ditch CMSs altogether for the majority of our clients? If you've got any thoughts on that, head over to wpbuilds.com. Search for episode number 347 and leave us a comment there. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with the Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place, invoice clients, and get 30% off new purchases. You can find out more by heading to go.me/WP Builds. And sincere thanks to GoDaddy Pro for their ongoing support of the WP Builds podcast. Okay, just a few quick reminders. The first one is to say head over to wpbuilds.com. Look for the section on the homepage called Coming Up, and you'll see the details plus calendar links for the shows that we're doing with Leo about Gato GraphQL, but also the Speed It Up show with Sabrina. They're happening on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and hopefully you'll be able to join us for those. Do remember as well that we do our Monday show this week in WordPress. It's 2 p.m. UK time. All of the shows that I've just mentioned can be found at the time they go live at wpbuilds.com/live. And don't forget, Black Friday, wpbuilds.com/black. Bookmark that page for all of your WordPress Black Friday deals. Okay, that's it. I hope that you enjoyed it. We'll be back next week. I'm going to fade in some cheesy music and say bye-bye for now.